What do you do if you're the active couple that likes to go 4x4ing and biking and camping every weekend you possibly can? You can go out of the van, which works great until you add to the family. Then what do you do? Well, you can't go out of the van, you're gonna run out of room. So what we did is added a rooftop tent. You might be asking, why a rooftop tent? We had the van perfectly camperized. We were able to hold everything we needed. But once we added baby and all the things a baby needs, it didn't work anymore. By adding the rooftop tent, we were able to give ourselves an additional platform to sleep on and keep all of the storage in the van.
So with the back of the van already loaded up with the kitchenette, the onboard water, our electrical system, our recovery gear, all of our basic camping gear, plus all of the toys and now all of the baby stuff, well, there was no more room to sleep in the back, so the tent was the only option. The problem was choosing which tent. There are so many different tents on the market that where do you even start? You've got soft shell tents, you've got hard shell tents, you've got semi-hard shell tents, you've got 2-man, 3-man, 4-man, and even 5-man tents. So with all of these options out there, it can be a little bit overwhelming. That means you really need to sit down and figure out what exactly it is you need and want out of the tent, and then you can start narrowing it down. So depending on the person and their situation, there's going to be different needs and wants for the tent. For us, because of our location, having an all-weather, all-season tent was a must, so that already ruled out quite a number on the market. Because our van is so tall, going with the soft shell would have been very difficult to actually collapse the thing because they have a cover that needs to go on afterwards, and well, I can barely reach the tent as it is. And secondly, the soft shell tents tend to be very thick when they're folded up, and we didn't want to add any more height than we had to. So that left us with the hard shell tents only, again, knocking a whole lot of other tents off the market. Our next requirement was we wanted a 4-man tent. Now I know there's only 2.5 of us, and a 4-man might seem like overkill, but if you think about it this way, getting a 2-3-man tent that's a hard shell is basically the same footprint when it's folded up anyways, so why not get the extra space so it's that much more comfortable inside when you have baby, 2 people, camping gear, and all of his toys and whatever else he needs.
Once you narrow it down to a hard shell, there's kind of 2 options. You have plastic or you have aluminum. For us, I didn't like the look of the plastic because they look like one of those rooftop carriers, and I've just never been a fan. But the other reason that we went with the aluminum is because the aluminum is a lot stronger. You can actually stand on it when it's closed. That made it, with our high top, a lot easier to buckle everything down. The other thing it does is it almost works like a basket where you can strap things to it when they're up there. We've used it a couple of times. It's just a nice option to have. Understandably, the biggest concern we had being a rooftop tent was being able to get the baby up and down the ladder safely.
Of course, having the big entrance and a nice sturdy ladder with the additional support on this tent makes it a breeze. The second concern we had was, like a lot of these tents, this tent was built overseas, so we really didn't know the quality or what we were really getting into. Unfortunately, because this is a new design, I haven't seen any of these in person before, so that meant we were taking a little bit of a gamble picking it up. However, I gotta say, after using this for a while, I am actually pretty impressed with the overall build. There's a few little fit and finish problems with it, some rivets that could have been done a little bit nicer, some scratches that were touched up in a slightly more questionable manner, but like I said, overall, it's been pretty good. The canvas itself is a very nice thick material. Both the fly and the inner tent are waterproof. Everything is double stitched, and all the zippers have very nice waterproofing on them as well. We've used the tent now in a few high wind situations as well as some pretty heavy rain, and we haven't had any water or any draft coming through at all. So in that aspect, the tent is most definitely doing what it was designed to do. For someone of average height, there's plenty of headroom in here, lots of room to move around and be comfortable. As you can see behind me, the windows fold down, there's bug netting all around. It's actually a fairly tight mesh as well, so a lot of the little bugs haven't been able to get through. If you do want to lower the bug screen, It unzips very easily and comes down, and you can use this as a second entrance. We have lots of little storage areas in here, hanging on the top on both sides. There's a few on the bottom too, and lots of different mounting options like Velcro and different straps all around the interior. So it has been set up in a manner that if you wanted, you could actually divide the tent into two sides. When it's folded open completely, we're just a little bit more than a standard king size bed, and using these Velcro sections here, you can put a wall between both sides. Now the one thing I need to point out is the mattress. It leaves a bit to be desired, but that's like a lot of rooftop tents. The only difference with this particular tent is one side is nice and plush. The other side, well, it's pretty firm. I believe the reasoning behind this is side is the side that's mounted onto the car, and the underside has fairly thick aluminum slats to support all of the weight and mount the tent, whereas the far side, the supports are much thinner, leaving a little bit more room for a slightly thicker mattress. Now the nice thing I did notice is you can unzip this cover and change the foam out, so I suspect that's probably what we're going to do in the future, is remove this really hard mattress from this side and put in something a little bit softer and a little bit thicker. There is room to add a bit more. The tent will still close, because even though they say you're not supposed to close it with all of your sleeping gear in here, we have done it when we were in a rush, and it still did close with the sleeping bags in place. I wouldn't recommend doing it with the pillows, but in a pinch, it did work.
An accessory that comes with this tent are these shoe bags. You clip them onto the outside of the tent like so. When you come in, you take off your shoes and put them in the bags. Sounds great. We might use them in the future if we have muddy shoes or whatnot, but right now, realistically, we don't even bother putting them on. We just use them as a place to store our shoes on top of while we're in the tent. An interesting thing about this tent is because it unzips around the top for all the doors, the door falls down. The nice thing about this is when you unzip, it just falls open. If there's any water on the door, it stays outside of the tent. However, in saying that, it does cover up the first few rungs of the ladder, so you can't necessarily climb up as easily. What we do to mitigate that is we just pull the door up and put it in. In most weathers, it's not wet, also because the fly falls down on top of the door.
So of course, probably one of the most important things to know about an RTT is how well does it open and close, and we'll go over that in a second. There's a few other things I want to go over first though, in the aspect of modifications that we had to make to this tent to make it work a little bit better. Now first off, most tents don't have these extra supports. They simply rely on the ladder to be able to support the upper section, and that works just fine. But because of the length of this tent, the manufacturer has supplied these extra poles to give it a little bit of extra stability, and they do work very well, except for the fact that from the factory, these holes are spaced out too far. So what ends up happening when you go to set it up, this post either ends up floating in the air, or it takes all the weight and the ladder ends up floating in the air and not touching the ground either. Neither of those options is very good. So what I ended up doing is I marked out between each one of the original holes and I drilled a new one. Now, having the half adjustments seems to have solved the problem of having something floating in the air. All three supports are now taking some weight. The other modification that we had to do to these bars was add some extensions. Because of the height of the van, even at maximum extension, these bars are floating off the ground about this far. So I just happened to have some aluminum tubing that was the same diameter and same wall thickness as the factory supplied part. So I just cut a chunk to length and then 3D printed a spacer and added an aluminum insert inside to hold it all together. Now it's fairly stable, and as you can see, we have plenty of additional adjustment to go. The second modification that we had to do involves the actual mounting system of the tent itself. Because this tent is so heavy at 75 kilograms or 165 pounds for those of you south of the border, we had to add some extra roof bars to it. Now the manufacturer says you only need 2, but I really wouldn't want to put that amount of weight on just 2 load bars on the roof of the van. So we added 2 more in the middle to give us 4 load bars and disperse the weight out a little bit. Problem is, the tent only comes with the hardware to mount to the 2 roof bars. So that means that we had to make some of our own. The originals are just these steel straps that you can see bend quite easily as you're tightening it down. So we actually printed up these ones on our 3D printer. Now, I know you're probably thinking, again, 3D printed parts, but trust me, they're plenty strong and they hold this in place just fine. So that leaves us with the setup and teardown. And we're not gonna go through the actual setup because 1, the tent's already set up, and 2, you can actually go onto the manufacturer's webpage and they'll show you how to set it up on there. So we'll just go through the teardown, because when we bought this, Susan was actually very concerned that she wouldn't be able to either set it up or tear it down in the event that I somehow injure myself. Not that that ever happens on my bike, and she had to tear it down by herself. So we'll go through the teardown. No, you know what? We're gonna let Susan go through the teardown.
All right, so we start the teardown by unclipping the fly. The fly is clipped all the way around with these clips here, and they just pull right off of the aluminum like that. The biggest issue that we have is that the clips are too high for me to reach. So it does take some fangdangling to be able to reach The next step is to lower the hoop around the actual entrance. So there are 2 pins here and on the other side over here to make the hoop a little bit smaller. And then after that, there's a zipper in the roof that exposes this extendable pole that has a cam lock on it. That pole is attached to the hoop and to the main support in the middle. Once the pole is out, then the hoop closes down. Next is to remove the support poles. Little pin and pull. At this point, the only thing holding the tent up is the ladder. And the next step is to lift the tent close. This was the part that I was the most concerned about, because if I couldn't actually lift it, I would be stuck if Cam wasn't with me. So here we go. You actually have a lot of control on this last half, which is not what I was expecting. This is the other part that's a lot easier on a lower vehicle. You have little bits of tent hanging out. For us, we have to stand on the roof to be able to tuck it back in. Not the easiest task. I gotta close the latches from the top. It's a lot easier for us because, again, we're really high. And the last step is to collapse the ladder and to fix it up top here. The ladder collapsed, it comes with 2 straps, and they just clip around the edges and hold the ladder down. This rooftop tent really did answer the problems that we were having with the van and the new baby. We couldn't modify the van anymore, and we can't tow a trailer and do the things that we want to do. So for you, you have to look at your situation. For those of you curious, driving with the rooftop tent on a van this high actually didn't make it any less stable than it was when we had a rooftop basket with a few things up there. In the twisties, you can feel it a bit, but it's not too bad. Anyway, we're off to the lake right now. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. See you out there. Bye for now.
Oh my god, that's a giant spider. What is that thing? Look at it.
That's the one that was above you.
It's freaking huge. Ew. Oh man.
This is why Cam wanted me to do this.
No, I had to hold the baby.